From the foothills of Colorado, welcome to Raiders in 30, the podcast for the thinking fan. Thank you all for coming back. We're at episode 4. We're making a little traction, and I got to tell you, if nothing else, this has just been a lot of fun. So, no matter where it goes, no matter where we end up, thank you for tuning in. I'm having a lot of fun doing it. And I got to say, when I decided to do this, I thought about the timing of it. And something that hit me was, you might have picked a bad time to do this. The season just ended, free agency kind of just happening. You've got the draft, and then you've got to figure out May, June, July and what you're going to talk about each week. Is there going to be enough going on week to week that you can, put out a show? And this week, I thought was going to be the first week of that challenge. This is the week I thought, okay, I don't really know what you're going to come up with here, but let's take a look, let's see what's going on. And as it turns out, I don't think I'm ever going to have an issue with this, mainly for one simple reason. There's several reasons. There's a lot of little reasons, and especially once the season hits and whatnot. But the reason that I don't think I'm going to have trouble is because at any point that I hear bullshit narrative, whenever I hear somebody just pushing garbage, even if it is something that I have addressed on the show before or that all of you know is bogus, I'm going to address it every week. So if every single week I hear a narrative that's not true, and even if it's similar to the one we talked about week before, I'm going to come on here and address it because I don't believe in letting people get away with fake narrative. And that brings us to the first topic of today. Today we're going to talk about a few things. We're going to talk about cognitive dissonance and people who hate Derek Carr. We're going to talk about scheme without talent, and we're going to talk about why I think the Raiders are going to be a double-digit win team. Last week I said they would be, and I realized this week, you know what? Let's talk about it. Let's explain why I feel that way. So let's kick it off with this. I saw something popping up, and at first this was something that, it looked like someone was just theorizing about it. But then next thing I know, it's being talked about on all the subs. It's being talked about. People, with large podcasts, large YouTube channels are posting this garbage, and which is a shame to see. It's a shame to see somebody who has a very successful Raider channel. I'm not going to name names, but people with very successful channels just out there peddling this garbage. Which, look, I understand. It's a challenge to make sure you have content all the time. But you know what? Don't force it. If you don't have content, let a day go as opposed to spitting out garbage. Of course, I'm talking about the Aaron Rodgers rumors. I'm talking about this new thing now that we're going to trade for Aaron Rodgers. That's the new plan. We're going to trade Carr and a third or whatever it is, and we're going to trade it for Aaron Rodgers. Yeah, I'll let Packer fans tell you why that probably doesn't even make sense for a team that just drafted Jordan Love and still has several Rodgers years left. But here's what hit me about that. At first when I heard it, I just wanted to get mad. My natural reaction was to get fired up and start yelling, you guys don't know what you're talking about. And then something dawned on me. And that was the idea of cognitive dissonance and the idea that Carr haters at this point are suffering from a mass case of cognitive dissonance. Now, if you don't know what cognitive dissonance is, that's cool. I'm no psychiatrist, so it's something that I probably don't even define that well. So I looked it up. Because I wanted a very simple 1 or 2 sentences that I could put it out in. And cognitive dissonance is this. It's basically the theory that says people will use bias to twist their beliefs and their expectations into reality, even when those beliefs and expectations don't match reality in any way. So the example I gave is this. If a person is positive, you're having an election of any kind, and a person is positive their candidate's going to win, but then they don't. At that point, what you should conclude is, I guess my candidate didn't have it. They weren't as popular as I thought. Someone experiencing cognitive dissonance comes back with, oh, well, it's because the other guy cheated. Because at the end of the day, their worldview has been so shook that they now have to come up with a reason why it happened. So it can't be that my candidate actually lost because they weren't the best candidate, they're not who the people wanted. At that point it becomes, no, it's because the other person cheated. Because they can't accept that their worldview was incorrect. That is the exact situation going on here with Derek Carr. I mean, to the letter, it is so ingrained that Derek Carr is not the guy, and the people that believe that. It's so deeply ingrained in their brain that they can't accept that it's just not true. They can't accept that we've proven time and time again that Derek Carr obviously is the guy. We've proven it when we didn't, when Gruden didn't dump him when we got here, when we didn't trade all of our picks for Kyler Murray last year, when we didn't draft a QB this year, when we didn't go out and give $50 million to Tom Brady. We have proven time and time again that Derek Carr's the guy. And not only that, not only is some guy, in the downstairs of his house in Colorado, some schlub telling you this, but forget me for a second. Jon Gruden and Mike Mayock have told us this, I mean, a dozen times each at this point. You can see every time Mayock gets asked a question, he starts with that sigh, oh, tell us, so where does Derek Carr stand? And, I mean, guys, this guy, he completes 70% of it, and so on. And you can just see, he'll answer the question because he's a nice guy. But you can honestly see that he's just not sure why it's still being asked. And that's what we stand with Carr, is we stand at a mass cognitive dissonance here. And the way it manifests itself, and this is why people get frustrated, and this, frankly, the entire Carr debate is one of the reasons I wanted to do this show to begin with. Because when I saw the discussions being had, I'm recognizing this isn't adding up. This isn't a rousing debate about the merits of our quarterback. These are people who have just lost their mind, and it's almost as if they have some sort of personal vendetta against the guy, which is odd on several levels. I spend a good amount of time on the boards and the subs, and I can say this is a pretty typical back and forth you'll have with somebody who's a Carr hater. And again, not somebody who says, hey, you know what? I'd like to see Carr take off with the ball a little more. I'd like to see Carr, chuck it deep even if you're not sure someone's there. Oh, okay, maybe we can have those conversations. That's fine. I'm someone who's advocated Carr needs to run more as well because he's actually a pretty good scrambling QB. He's just kind of stopped doing it recently. And that's not a Gruden system thing because we all remember Rich Gannon taking off quite a bit. So yeah, of course there are areas where Carr could improve, and nobody would say otherwise. But here's a conversation you generally have with somebody who has completely lost their mind when it comes to Derek Carr. Derek Carr misses open wide receivers all the time. Actually, Carr has the second highest completion percentage in the league. He's barely behind Drew Brees. Well, that's because he only threw short. Well, Carr is middle of the pack on yards per throw, that's true, but Raider wide receivers are actually toward the top of the league in yards after catch, a stat you'd know if you listen to Raiders in 30. So that proves he's not just dumping, 1-yarders off to covered wide receivers. No, that's all on his wide receivers. They're the ones doing it. Well, wait a minute. You can't say a quarterback has nothing to do with yards after the catch, right? I mean, obviously they've got to have some impact. Yeah, well, Carr doesn't get it done when it matters. Well, Derek Carr is the leader in fourth quarter comebacks since coming into the league. I mean, this guy built his reputation on that. 2016 alone was, he was the comeback kid, and he's still been doing that ever since. Okay, well, how about that throwaway in the Titans game? Okay, well, let me ask you a question. If Carr chucked the ball into coverage and the pass was, knocked down or intercepted or whatever, would you think today that he is a better quarterback? And then at that point, once you've asked a question, once you've just kept setting the narrative, you basically then are just stuck with, well, you're just an idiot at Carr stand, you're stupid, you love him, why didn't you go blank is blank already? And that's when you hit the point where you say, okay, you know what? These people have legitimately lost their minds. But go back and listen to the conversation we just had right there. Is that not pretty typical? Every point that someone will make about Carr, and you can come back and say, you know what, here's the thing though, the team hasn't been successful. I'm not going to deny, there is no denying that. But when you say Carr can't hit wide receivers, or that, he only dumps it off, or that, he doesn't get it done when it matters, I mean, none of that is true. None of that adds up. None of that is a fact in the arena of objective reality. And every single one of those points that you generally hear can be debunked. And again, there are criticisms of look, every single quarterback in the league deserves some criticism. There's something you can do to pick their game apart, every one of them. But at the end of the day, for some reason, the extent of cognitive dissonance among people who hate Derek Carr is mind-blowing. And something, I love doing the research for this show. Not only because I love doing the show, but also because I love researching NFL football. I've talked about that before. It's something I love doing. And I wanted to find any example I could of anyone who's had success, but for some reason, there's just such a disconnect between the abilities of this person and the success of this person versus the perception of them. And the only case I could find that really even came close was when I took a look at Tony Romo. But what's interesting about that is when Tony Romo was having success, and just getting crapped on, dumped on every single week, that wasn't coming from a lot of Cowboy fans. And I know the reason I say that, and I don't know that, of course, but the reason I say that is because I know a lot of Cowboy fans. I went to school. I had a lot of people from Texas there. I went out to visit them, made a lot more friends while I was there. So I know a lot of Cowboys fans, people I routinely talk to, people I went to school with, and that I've met friends of theirs when I went to visit, etc. And most of the people that I remember trashing Tony Romo were Giants fans, which makes sense, when I was living in New York for quite a while. So most of the criticism I ever heard was from Giant fans, and I don't recall a large number of Cowboy fans. And look, maybe you know some Cowboy fans, ask them. I don't recall a lot of them just bashing Romo to this extent. Maybe they'd get frustrated with him at times, sure, but we have people who are in here not saying I'm frustrated with Carr, not saying I think he could do some things better. We've only got a couple of those people. What we've mostly got are people who have lost their minds and hate Derek Carr for reasons that I don't think any of us will ever understand because they don't make sense. And I got to tell you this. The Aaron Rodgers rumors are garbage. Anyone out there pushing them, trying to get clicks, you're garbage, and your page is garbage, and your show is garbage. And every week, if we get some new bogus rumor, I'm going to tell you in advance, I'm going to come on here and address it. Because they're just that. They're bogus BS rumors. And I don't want to let them pass. A lot of people are content to say, just let it go. One of my goals in this show is I don't want to let bogus rumors go. So we're going to talk about it every week it pops up. Derek Carr's the guy, and at this point, if you listen to the show, I'm assuming you're with me on that, because if you don't like Carr, you probably got sick of hearing me talk about it. That said, let's move on, because there's something else that and it's kind of Carr-related as well. And it's the idea of scheme and talent. Because I think on the first week, I mentioned, we talked about Gunther a bit, and I just mentioned scheme and how people like to talk about scheme. And that's something I still see popping up. I'll see the cliche narratives, both on offense and defense. Oh, offensively, we're boring. All we do, we run, pass, repeat. That's all we do. Gruden doesn't mix it up enough. Or, of course, Gunther, the classic, you know what, we're getting burnt over the middle every single week. What's the scheme? Why isn't he scheming better? He should scheme. Paul Gunther has no scheme. And you keep hearing those words pop up. And that's where you kind of realize that there's a difference between an analytical discussion about the sport and about your team and just buzzwords and sloganeering. And what I've figured out is that scheme at this point is the latter category. Scheme is just a buzzword. Scheme is something you use when you're just trying to sloganeer. Let's start on the offensive side. Let's start with the narrative that Gruden is boring and there's no scheme and there's poor play calling. My question, very simple, or I have a couple of them, but let's start here. Okay, we're on the 8-yard line and it's 1st and goal. So Jacobs is in the backfield and the box is stacked. I mean, they've got 8 people in the box. The other team has put their best cornerback, their CB1, on our tight end, Darren Waller. So what play would you have called? Tell me the brilliant scheme that gets Rico Gafford open in that situation. What route are you drawing up for Keelan Doss? Okay, what exactly is it that you're doing when our wide receiver group is so weak? Okay, and by the way, I'm especially talking about when Ty was hurt, after Ty got hurt, and when Renfro got hurt. What is your scheme that's beating a defense that disrespects our wide receiver group so much that they have their top cornerback on our tight end? What's your scheme there? Or maybe let's go a little further down the field. Instead of we're not in the goal line, let's bring it back. Let's go around maybe our own 30. So Carr's downfield throwing. He doesn't throw downfield enough. Okay, well, what's the scheme that gets a plantar fasciitis-ridden Ty Williams down the field so Carr can bomb it to him? Which route are you drawing up that gets one of the 372 low-rent wide receiver 2s we've had, many of whom can barely catch a ball, open downfield for Carr to chuck it up to? What is your plan? What's your scheme? What's your route that is making up for the fact that we have had serious talent deficiencies at the wide receiver position for most of the tenure of Carr's career? And I know some of you are saying, well, hold on a second, Crabtree, Cooper, and yes, that's fine. And we've talked about that on this show before. When he had Crabtree and Cooper, look at how well this team did in 2015 and 2016. And the team did very well in 2015, and that we're going to dive into that a little later. Yes, when he's had good wide receivers, when he's had consistency in the system, when he has had those two things, Carr has excelled. He's done very well. So yeah, I agree. We get him to pieces. And you know what? I agree after what we got him in the draft and what he's got coming back next year. Then yeah, this podcast cannot happen in the same format next year. Of course not. I can't come back here and tell you, well, Carr's not getting it done because he doesn't have the weapons. I will be the first guy to come in here and tell you, you know what? In that case, it turns out I was wrong. It turns out that Derek Carr, even with the weapons, wasn't able to get it done. But here's the thing. I don't believe that's going to happen because we've seen what he can do with the weapons and we've seen what he can do with some consistency. And as you know, and by the way, we know this, Derek Carr next year for the first time in his career will have year 3 of a system. We're all looking forward to it. Let's go back to that Titans game, the throwaway, the famous throwaway that every Carr hater hangs their hat on. Okay, go back, if you have all 22, I want you to go back and watch that play, and you'll see that nobody's open. No one's even close to open, and Carr's about to get hit out of bounds. But I want you to tell me, what is your scheme there that gets receivers open, even by a foot, so that Carr can throw it to somebody? What was the scheme failure on that play is a better way to word this question. What did Jon Gruden not effectively do on that play to get his wide receivers open? Is it that? Is it that Derek Carr can't find an open wide receiver? Or is it that when you're running out Zay Jones, Rico Gafford, and Keelan Doss, you're not really putting your best foot forward? What about on defense? Let me ask you this. I looked up some stats. As you know, I love stats. And I want to know, for people, you defensive-minded people, the people who just do not like Gunther, the people who think that Gunther's got to go, I want you to tell me what your scheme is that was going to drop Tahir Whitehead's QB rating against from 140.4. 140.4. The average passer rating against Tahir Whitehead was 140.4. So what is your scheme that would have changed that? The completion percentage against Tahir Whitehead, 78.8%. To give you an idea, we always talk about Carr being number 2 in completion percentage, and he's at, it's like 70.2%, so just call it 70%. That's the second best in the league, and Breeze is barely above that. If you throw the ball against Tahir Whitehead in coverage, you have a 78.8% completion percentage. Somebody tell me, hit me up, send me an email, raidersin30@gmail.com, or you know what, go ahead and leave a comment in the comment section and tell me what scheme you have, what moves you're making that are going to make Tahir Whitehead suddenly not be the worst coverage linebacker in football. And you know what? No disrespect to Whitehead. He's a good guy. He plays hard. He can't cover anybody. That's just a stated fact. We have the numbers in front of us to show that. Tahir Whitehead cannot cover anyone. And yet, we're led to believe, by some, that there's this magical scheme that if you just moved him from here to here, okay, that if you just shifted him to the left and told him, cover here a little more than there, that somehow this guy would be an amazing coverage linebacker. It's not true, and there is nothing objective that you can tell me to prove that Paul Gunther's scheme is the reason we don't have good linebackers, or we didn't have good linebackers. Very important distinction to make. And bringing up those linebackers, I think this is as good a time as any to jump into our third and final point. And we're going to go a little longer on this one. The Raiders are going to be a double-digit win team. And I said this last week. I said I'm not talking about 10-6. I think this is an 11-5 or 12-4 team. And I mentioned it, I said, hey, I think barring any crazy injuries, and look, I mean, someone's going to get hurt, obviously, but I'm talking about, well, half of our starters have gone down for the year. Barring something insane like that, this team is going to win 11 or 12 games. And there's a reason for it. And there's a number of things we improve. We got Carr some more weapons. We've got some consistency in the system. We've got rookies last year who, this is their first NFL season, playing a 17-week schedule. It's a different ball game. They'll be more ready to go this year. And there's a lot of positives we could point to. But I'm saying this is an 11 or 12 win team for one reason, and that is defense. I did a lot of digging on this one. And I went back and I looked at each year Carr's been in the league. And I'm going to tell you something that you're going to hear this and you're going to say, well, this isn't exactly the hot take I'm tuning in for, but work with me. Since Derek Carr has been here, he has not had a good defense. Now, before you shut it off thinking, why the hell don't I just start my own podcast if that's what you're going to tell me, I want to look at two things specifically. I want to dive into points allowed, because at the end of the day, all the fancy stats we have, how many points are you giving up per game? It does matter. But the other one I want to look at is DVOA. That's a defense adjusted value over average, I believe is what that stands for. And if you don't know that one, I like advanced statistics, but look, I'm not one of these brainiacs who can rattle it off, say this is exactly what it is, this is the formula, etc. But this is a very useful one. And the simplest explanation, as far as my understanding goes of DVOA, is basically this. If you're looking at, okay, let's say a defense gave up first downs on 80% of the third downs they face. So they faced 10 third downs or 20 third downs, and they gave up first downs on 16 of those 20. You'd probably look at that and say, wow, that team's terrible. This team cannot stop anything on third down. Okay, but what if those 16 first downs were all on third and less than a yard, third and inches? Well, you might look at that differently. You might look at that differently than, look, what if the other 4 were all 3rd and 2 and they stuffed those? Again, you might have a different idea of that defense. Or what if there was another defense that only gave up a first down on 30% of its third downs, but out of 20 third downs, 18 of them were, 15 or more yards to go, and the other team still completed, 40%, 30%, you'd probably say, oh, that's not very good. And if you've watched enough Raider games in the last 5-6 years, you know all about giving up a first down on 3rd and 13, 3rd and 15, 3rd and 18. So DVOA is basically a way to look at, apples to apples. Not, well, who sucks on third down? No. All things equal, what team is best at 3rd and long? What team is best at 3rd and 1? So taking that into effect, and I hope I gave a good explanation. And if I didn't, by all means, take a look up. It's take a few minutes, read up about it. It's pretty interesting stuff. That said, I want to look at each year, since Carr's been in the league, where we ranked. So I'm going to start from last year and work backwards. Last year, the Raiders, 31st in DVOA, 24th in points. In 2018, 30th in DVOA, dead last in points. 2017, 29th in DVOA, 20th in points. 2016, 22nd in DVOA, 20th in points. 2015, 15th in DVOA, interesting, we'll talk about that, 22nd in points. And then 2014, 26th in DVOA, 32nd, dead last in points. So if you look at that, the 2015 year is obviously interesting, and I've got a little blurb on that. But before we get there, looking at those numbers, Derek Carr has never, once in 6 years, even had a decent defense. Even the 2015 year when we were 15th DVOA, we were still 22nd in points given up. And that's hands down the best defense he's had. And we also had a number of turnovers that year and 2016. People talk about 2016 a lot. And the Raiders that year, two interesting notes from that year. One, we had 30 turnovers. And turnovers, to an extent, are very much 50-50 propositions. So that can go up, that can go down. Obviously, look, having a better secondary can help to an extent, but things like fumble recoveries and even a lot of interceptions, a lot of that is luck based. It can be something as simple as did a ball get, how many of those balls got deflected, or fumbles. Again, what was your fumble? Did you recover 80% of the fumbles that hit the ground this year? That's good, but here's the problem: you're not going to do that next year. That is the outlier. So we had 30 turnovers in 2016, and we had 25 turnovers in 2015, so we were actually pretty close. Here's the big difference. In general, they say that a one-score game is pretty much a 50-50 proposition. If you win or lose, whenever a game we're talking, one score, the game really could go either way. And what's interesting is this: in 2016, the Raiders were 9-1 in one-score games. 10-1 if you want to count an 8-point win against the Chargers, but 9-1 in one-score games. In 2015, we were 5-5 in one-score games. So really, the funny thing about the 2015 and 2016 seasons is you really could have flipped them if just a couple of 50-50 games went the other way. For all the talk about 2016, 2015 just as easily could have been, the big year where we coasted into the playoffs, with a bye, which we were going to do in 2016 before the broken leg. So those 2 years, a lot closer than you actually think they are, a lot closer than I thought they were. And again, DVOA was lower in was higher in 2015. 2 years, both those years that Derek Carr had the wide receivers. So that makes me feel pretty good going into this year. But the point of this exercise is to talk about the defense. And I went and I said, as soon as I saw these numbers, the first thing I did was weep openly into my pillow, just realizing, wow, I am wasting time watching this defense over the years. However, I feel better about it this year for obvious reasons that we'll get into in a moment. But the first thing I want to do is, after I looked these numbers up, I said, I'm going to go look at the Super Bowl winners for that same stretch of years. I want to take a look, and I want to know where they stood. So let me give you the past 6 Super Bowl winners, and I apologize for reading this list because it's just brutal being a Raider fan listening to this, but you know what? The past is the past, and all that matters is what we do going forward. The Chiefs last year, 14th DVOA, 7th in points allowed. Pats the year before that, 16th DVOA, 7th in points allowed. The year before that, the Eagles, 5th DVOA, 4th in points allowed. 2016, the Pats, 16th in DVOA, but 1st in points allowed. The Broncos before that, 1st in DVOA, 4th in points allowed. And the Pats before that, 12th DVOA, 8th in points allowed. For all the talk about how this is an offense league and this is about going out there and being able to chuck the ball downfield, all of that, while having some merits, is bogus. Teams win with defense. It's still happening. And if I went earlier, the team that won in 2013 was the Seahawks, and we all know how that defense was. I went back, I looked at another 4 or 5 years. This is not an anomaly. I didn't happen to hit 6 weird years. Every team that wins the Super Bowl now does it with a decent DVOA at minimum and a top 10 in points per game allowed. The Raiders' future and playoff runs and Super Bowl runs aren't about Derek Carr at this point. They're not about his wide receiver group. They're not about Jacobs. They're not about Waller. They're not about that offensive line. If we are going to make the playoffs and we are going to make a legitimate run at a Super Bowl, it is going to be because of our defense. And that is why I think we're a double-digit win team, because the Raiders now have defense. We have coverage linebackers. We have a pass rush. We have defensive tackles, and we have quite a bit of depth at the position. We have cornerbacks. We have safeties. We have slot corner. We have depth in those positions. We are not a team that is going to run out there and say, you know what, my God, please just don't throw to this area. Please just don't run it to this area. We have our bases covered. We don't have to go into a game against some lethal tight ends and just think, okay, well, this guy's going. I mean, listen, I love fantasy football. If you're listening, you probably do too. I enjoy daily fantasy. And for the last several years, anytime someone had people going against the Raiders, they'd ask me, hey, give us some advice. Or anytime I'm filling out a daily fantasy lineup, there was always one staple. Find the tight end that's playing against the Raiders and start him. That is not the case anymore. Anyone doing that week 1 could be in for a rude awakening, because we have that covered. We have the outside covered. We have speed. We have some mean dudes in the secondary who are going to hit you hard. They'll draw a couple flags, but you know what? I always go back to that Seattle Legion of Boom. They were always the leading secondary in penalties, and they didn't care because of a great philosophy they had, which is, look, they're not going to penalize us on every play. So just play physical and understand that sometimes, we'll get called, but for the most part, we'll get away with it, and we'll create enough turnovers to make up the difference in those penalties. If our defense, and listen, this is the best Raider defense in a decade. Find me a Raider defense in the last 10 years that was better on paper than this, and I understand we have to see the product first, but you can't do it. And it's young and hungry. And you know what? You can't underestimate that either. If our defense even improves to the league average, and last year was 7-9 with rankings of 31 and 24, and we added those offensive pieces, then somebody tell me why this team isn't improving by 4 or 5 wins. Thank you all for tuning in. Pleasure to be here. We'll be back next week. I'm sure there'll be some more garbage we can talk about because, hey, every week there's garbage that flies up. But I'm looking forward to being back. Everyone have fun. I think we're starting to get back to normal. We're getting there. Slowly but surely we're getting there. Stay safe. I hope you're all working. Thank you for tuning in to Raiders in 30, the podcast for the thinking fan. You guys have a great day.